kind of moving into like the black belt level of emotional intelligence. We're really, we've done so much work here. We have our foundation in mindfulness. We've been exploring self-awareness and self-management, motivation, what motivates us, empathy, and all of the pieces that we've been talking about are all going to be required as we move into this final section. So when Daniel Goleman was talking about 5 components of emotional intelligence, he actually called this last one social skills, but we're calling it leadership because leadership is a social process. It's a process of engaging with people, influencing people, drawing people out, collaborating with people towards some kind of a vision. So the 2 topics here, this kind of integrates, as I said, this is really integrating all of the pieces that we have explored so far. There's 2 things that we're going to focus on. The first is communicating with insight, and the second is leading with compassion. So we're going to start with communicating with insight. And I'm wondering, maybe by a show of hands, how many of you have ever found yourself saying yes when you really mean no? How many of you have found yourself withholding your feelings because you're afraid of conflict? How many of you have disengaged from a conversation because you know that you won't be heard, or you feel that you won't be heard? Okay, so this is the social element of emotional intelligence. How do we express what's happening for us? How do we connect with what's happening for us? How do we build connection and navigate sometimes the challenges in conversation? We all have challenging conversations at times. So the place we're going to focus our attention is on difficult conversations and how it is that we go about preparing for difficult conversations. And again, this requires all of the skills that we've been talking about in the last 2 days. So there's a process that we're going to use, and this is based on a book called Difficult Conversations. I believe this came out of the Harvard Negotiation Project. So people who've spent many, many decades studying human conflict, negotiation, communication skills, and how it is that we can create more win-wins, more connection, more harmony when there's discordance. So what they talk about, there's actually 5 steps to a difficult conversation, but the very first one, it's a first step, but it's got multiple levels. So the first one is actually, before you even have a conversation, the first step is sort of that Viktor Frankl pause. So in that space lies our opportunity for freedom, lies our choice. So we might recognize there's a difficult conversation I'm needing to have. There's something I'm kind of dreading, and I know that I have to speak about it, or there's something that happened and it's sitting with me, I've been carrying it. Maybe I manage a team and I know that I really need to speak up about this thing, but I don't really want to. But before I do that, as preparation, I'm going to think about what's the content of this conversation that I'm going to have. What's the circumstance? So what actually happened here? Next, I'm going to observe and connect with how I'm feeling about the situation. What's the emotion that I'm experiencing? Maybe I'm feeling some anger in my body, or maybe I'm feeling some disappointment. Maybe I'm feeling some hurt based on whatever this situation was. And then lastly, and this is kind of a new element here, is an identity piece. So these authors from the Harvard Negotiation Project have talked about often when we get triggered in a conflict, so something has happened, and it tends to hit us at one of these 3 levels. So it tends to hit us, and we might not be conscious of this. So this is where there's some inner work to discover which one of these identity pieces is being touched for me in this particular conflict. So number 1, am I competent? Has something about this conflict kind of called my competence into question? Do I feel like this person doesn't think I'm competent? Am I doubting my own competence as a result of this difficult conflict that we're experiencing. Am I a good person? So, what was my intention there? Was that a good intention? Do they think I had a good intention? Do they think I'm a bad person? Was I a bad person? We can get kind of caught in a little bit of that. And then lastly, am I worthy of love and respect? So sometimes if we get triggered, we're in a conflict and we get triggered, we can kind of cave into, oh, I'm not worthy, I did something wrong. And that sort of shuts us down further. So a really important part of this is before having a difficult conversation, we walk through these stages for ourselves before we even take that step of considering how to approach the conversation. So we're going to work with this, and for this, I would like you all keep your journals with you, and please stand up and find a partner, preferably somebody that you have not worked with, and then have a seat. Okay. Clap your hands if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Okay, fantastic. Good one. So a little example of this, just to ground us in this a little bit. I was thinking about an example I could share here, and I had an experience just last week with a colleague. We're a pretty extensive team, somebody that I work with at U of T. We were preparing for a presentation, and both of us the day before had really jam-packed schedules. This is the content. I'm speaking to the content here. We had jam-packed schedules, and we had about a half an hour to finalize these PowerPoint slides for this presentation we were giving to 50 people the next day. So we came together, we went through it, we cut some slides, we added some slides, and I knew that she was very busy and very stressed. She'd made it really clear that she was feeling really stressed. So I thought, okay, I can take this, I can make these changes, I'll make the changes, I'll send back out the slides. So I sent back the slides, and later that day, I opened my inbox and got an email from her saying, I got your slides, and the one thing that I asked for didn't get changed. And I just went, I was shocked, I was stunned, I felt my back go up, I was like defensive, I was like, I felt angry, I felt hurt because I was trying to support her by offering to do that work, so I felt that, and I was thinking, as, with this framework, it's like, what's the identity piece that's hitting for me? And I think what it came to was, am I a good person? Like she somehow was feeling that I had done something that was not a good person, or whatever it was, but I was aware of, like, okay, I think that's where it hit me, maybe a little bit of competence as well. And I had to sit with that. And eventually we did have a conversation. And I was able to kind of, before that also, I recognized she was very stressed. She is somebody who tends to react quickly when she is stressed. I know this about her pattern. But still, it was, I kind of moved through this process. So in a few moments, you will have an opportunity to kind of move through this process. And the first thing to do here is think about a situation, think about a difficult conversation, maybe that you had in the past that didn't go very well, or maybe it's a conversation that you kind of feel you should have, but you find yourself avoiding it. Difficult conversations are usually those conversations we kind of dread. We really wish we didn't have to have them. So the first thing I want to do is just give you a moment of silence, just to find a conversation from your own life that you can work with for this activity. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a moment to find an example for yourself. hopefully you have something that you can work with. Want to bring a reminder to one of the ground rules that we started with yesterday about confidentiality. So if your partner is sharing with you a conversation, it's an honor to hear what's a conversation that somebody else, what their process is. So just hold that with confidentiality and care. You're going to choose who is person A. So I'm going to say person A has their birthday is closer to the start of the year. Let's say January 1st. So whoever's birthday comes first before December is person A. So person A, you are going to share with your partner from these 3 levels. This is only your point of view. You're not doing any kind of a role play. You're just sharing your experience of this conversation that maybe you haven't had. So what was the content? So what was it that happened? How did you feel? And then you really want to make sure that you spend some time exploring this. What do you think it might have touched that particularly challenging experience? So you're going to have 3 minutes for person A to share at those 3 levels. Okay? Question?
So person A's birthday is closer to
Yes. So January, starting in January. Yes. So the next part of this exercise is you've had a chance to talk about these 3 levels from your perspective. What happened, how did I feel, and what was at stake for me? What was that identity piece that got triggered for me? Now we're going to practice. We've done a lot of work around empathy, mindful listening, trying to take the perspective of another person. So there's an opportunity here. You're going to continue with person A. So the person who was just speaking is going to continue to speak. This time, you are going to try to imagine the same situation from the other person's perspective. So just try to shift to connection. Find that there's a similarity between us. I can notice that similarity. I can extend some kindness. How might this other person have experienced this situation? What might have happened from their perspective? What might they have been feeling? And what might have been at stake for them? Did they feel that their competency was being threatened? That it was a concern about whether they were a good person? Did they feel that they weren't worthy of love and respect? So just do your best with this. It's an experiment. I'm going to give you a few more minutes for person A to try to do this from the perspective of the other person. Begin. Yes.
You said we had to be conflict with?
Yeah, you're trying to put yourself into their shoes. Okay? Thank you, person A. We're going to move now to person B. Person B, could you please share what was the content, but you don't need to spend much time here. Really brief. The content is the least important part here. Briefly, what was the content? How did it make you feel? What was the identity issue? What got triggered? What was at stake for you? You have 3 minutes, and for the group of 3, we're going to have an opportunity for the third person to speak after this, so don't worry. Give your second person this opportunity. Okay, begin. And then the second piece, person B, imagine this situation from the perspective of the other person. What happened from their perspective, what might they have been feeling, and what was at stake for them? You have a couple minutes to share that. So the group of three, you are now going to have an opportunity for the third person. The rest of you, an opportunity for a meta conversation about moving through that process. So how did it feel to have this conversation with your partner? So just a free flow conversation here. I'm going to ring the bell halfway through. So those of you having the meta conversation, you just get that extra opportunity to breathe and pause. Group three, that will be your sense of time to switch to the other person, okay? Please begin. Meta conversation, please continue. Group of 3, moving into that second piece. Thanking your partner. And we'd love to just take a couple minutes for some comments. What was it like to move through that process of first identifying what was happening for yourself and then trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and what might have been happening for them? Any comments on that exercise? Yeah.
I think the first one where you're saying why it's a difficult conversation for you, a lot of the things were repeated when we were explaining what we thought the other person was feeling, because the reason it's a difficult conversation is because of how the other person is going to feel about it.
Okay. Okay. So some fear and anxiety about how the other person, as a result of the conversation. Yeah. It takes a lot of
Also
courage.
sounds like in a difficult conversation that there's stuff at stake for everyone. So it's not like there's a balance there, but there's a lot on both sides. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Alex.
Yeah, one of the challenge of such situations is like once you have experienced it, it's easy to sort of think back and say, oh, I should have done things differently because you have sort of the information. But sometimes you get the information in the middle of the conflict. And that's also sometimes why the conflict is here, because both of the parties didn't get enough information. And what I like about this sort of framework is that the I am competent, am I competent question, which is actually raises the matter of, do I have the information that really helped me in the conflict, or should I just step back and trying to gather more information to try to see if maybe the other party is right, maybe the other party is right because they have an information that I don't have, or maybe they missed this information and I should give this information. But I mean, in my case, it's like information is sort of always, the central point.
I'm hearing sort of a desire for humility. You know, it's like I have this information, but maybe I don't have all this information, and having that in mind as a stance, which is very helpful to have that as a stance. Yeah. Other comments?
My partner and I had a very similar experience, and so it was, at least for me, a lot easier to empathize and to feel what he was feeling and to really understand the emotions behind it. But also, I noticed that, similar to Harry's point, that a lot of the reason that our conversations were so difficult was because we were focused on what that other party was going to feel and how they were going to react. Because maybe it was a conversation that they didn't expect.
So when you went through that second part of the exercise, which was really trying to imagine from the perspective of the other person, did that shift any of the anxiety about how that person might respond? Did you notice that gave you anything extra that sort of helped you feel more prepared to step into the conversation? I'm curious what the impact of doing that second part was.
It made me feel worse.
Okay.
Yeah, it made it more difficult for me. I don't know about more difficult.
Because
Okay.
you don't want whatever that person's perceiving to be something that's against your identity.
So maybe doing the other side of it made you realize that the stakes are really high. I think that's such an interesting part of this activity, is to say, like, sometimes we think the challenge is the content, right? We get stuck on that first piece. So it's interesting to hear that unpacking this, and that's okay, right? Sometimes we say, oh, I'm going to practice breathing to be calm, but actually when I stop, I realize I'm not okay. So that's an okay awareness to have. But that's so interesting to say, wow, by doing this preparation and looking into it, there's so much more than the content here. You know, and that isn't a bad thing to say. Everyone in this difficulty has something at stake, and that is a lot of information and awareness.
Yes.
I guess I found that the difficulty was more on my side, so it was like a misunderstanding. And so when I brought it up, the other person was more taken aback, and we talked about maybe more defensive because they didn't realize that it was a problem. So then perhaps in the future, like basically if I have to interact with that person often, I just kind of have to keep that in mind that maybe I don't have to elevate it, or it's not such a difficult conversation to have. But if I take into account that it may not be so difficult, I don't have to be so, I guess, focused on it, and then just do more of an offhand comment. It might be better.
Okay. So part of this, like the part that I find really powerful about this is that the message here, you know, and often find ourselves in difficult conversations and we didn't anticipate it, you know, and it happens. Here we are. Oh, here it is. It just emerges. We weren't expecting it. And then there's other kinds of circumstances where we find ourselves in where something happened, it didn't quite sit right, and we have this opportunity to prepare for a difficult conversation. So this is a tool when we have that opportunity to prepare, and part of this might be, what got touched for me? And how can I do some loving kindness and compassion towards myself? What are the other elements that I need to do for myself in advance of bringing it to this other person? So we're really kind of bringing that loving attention to ourselves so that we can get ourselves into a place where we're most capable of engaging in this kind of conversation. This is actually one step of 5 steps that these authors. Let's see here. Oh, sorry. Okay. So the first step is to do this work and maybe even do this with a trusted friend. You know, like I just want to process this. There's this thing that happened.